Hello, everyone. This is Minister Nazir with the Association of the Faith Originally Delivered. I've been getting a question for at least the last couple of months. And the question is, who is Jesus? So everybody knows about Christianity. Everybody knows what Christianity says about Jesus, and everybody knows about Islam. But when you start to question the deity of Jesus and uh, his position in the Trinity, or when you start to challenge the Trinity, people want to know, well, if he's not God, then who is he? And so today we will be looking at this question of who Jesus is. If Jesus is not God, who is he? The primary way that we can answer this question is to look at Jesus through the New Testament. The reason why we can only look at Jesus through the New Testament is because the New Testament is the only record about Jesus ever. There is no other record about Jesus. You have Islam and the Quran, you have the Talmud, but those were written very late in history. If Jesus was born in the year 5 of the Common Era and died in the year 30 to 33 in the Era, then people who are writing all the way in the 10th century, namely Islam, and in the 5th century and the 15th century, this is Judaism, they might not be the best sources. When it comes to trying to figure out the truth of a matter, it's best to get some historicity when it comes to that person. And the best way to get historicity is to find out who walked with him and what they recorded about him. And so the New Testament is probably the most historical that we can get, but outside of the New Testament, there is really no way to verify um, that Jesus actually existed. And so you have to think about this though. A man who died, or a man who Christianity claims died and rose from the dead and is seated in on the right hand of the Father, meaning he never died. There's no way to prove that such a person exists. And so the best way that we can go about this and answering who Jesus is to look into the New Testament. Um, we have to understand that the New Testament and the Old Testament were originally made to be not only for religious purposes, but for historical purposes. The disciples and the people who were writing about Jesus were trying um, to teach the people who were coming after them, who had never seen or heard or been with Jesus, who Jesus was and what he said. Okay. And so we're going to look at the New Testament, but we're not going to look at the New Testament in the order that it's written in. We're going in the order that it is right now, the Christian New Testament. But we're going to look at it from by the order of um, of writing. And so many Christians don't know that the New Testament is not in the order in which it was written in. Um, we call this the chronology of the New Testament. Okay, so we will be looking at each book in the New Testament and determining whether it is or is not historical and what it is really saying. And so to do this, we are going to look at the New Testament according to the way it was written. So this is the timeline of uh, of the New Testament. First, the oldest book is James. Then next on the timeline is the Jerusalem Council. We'll tell you why that's separate in a minute. Then there's the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. There's the writings of Paul, First Peter and Second Peter, Jude, Mark, Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, the writings of Luke, and the writings of John. So first, in the order of events, is the book of James. The book of James is the oldest book in the New Testament, written between 45 and 48 CE, or the Common Era. Okay. The book of James not only is, in my opinion, the oldest, but in my opinion, is also the most important. Why? First of all, James is the brother of Jesus. All of church history indicates that Jesus is the brother, that James is the brother of Jesus. They might try to say cousin sometimes. They might try to say, oh, he was, step brother, but he's still a brother. Just to give you a little, uh, a little cultural context. Whenever you have a family, the family is founded on the man, on the father, on the husband. The husband marries a wife, and all the children of that wife are considered brothers and sisters. If he marries another woman, then those siblings are not step siblings. They are still brothers and sisters. Now, if something happens to the dad, if the mother gets divorced, or if the father dies and the mother goes in and she marries someone else, then the children that she has with the next man are stepchildren. Because remember, the family is founded by the man. And so to say that James was Jesus' stepbrother, even though Jesus is the son of Joseph and James is the son of Joseph, they have the same father. They're siblings, not step siblings, but siblings. But James is the brother of Jesus. This is important. Why is this important? Because who would know Jesus better than his siblings? Who would know Jesus better than his siblings? Who would know what Jesus taught better than his siblings? I'm pretty sure if it was very controversial, it would have come up in the home first before it went to any of the strangers outside. Okay. So the first importance of the book of James is the author. The author of the book is James. This is James the Just. James the Just was the brother of Jesus first. Okay. Second, James the Just was one of the 12. When you're reading one of the 12 apostles, when you're reading the New Testament, you would not think that James was one of the 12 apostles, but he was. And this fact is covered up. Not only is the fact that Jesus had brothers and sisters covered up by Christianity and the Catholic Church was the one that decided to cover that up, but James's apostleship is also covered up. A lot of people don't know that the book of James was written by an apostle, the brother of Jesus, and also he was one of the 12 apostles. And one of the things that you'll see when you're reading the New Testament is that there are so many people named James and there are so many people named Judas. Okay. There are 3 or 4 Judases and there are 2 or 3 Jameses. Okay. And the purpose of that is to confuse. So the Catholic Church says this is not the same James, this is another James. Oh, okay. But they never tell you it's the brother of Jesus. Um, and so um, James was one of the 12. We see James in the book of Matthew when on the Mount of Configuration. James is there with John, okay? And then the third and one of the most important details of who James is, James was the first and only bishop of the church. Remember that the church, according to Christianity, or all of the disciples of Jesus were all centered in Jerusalem. There was one bishop of Jerusalem, and that was James the Just. Okay, he was the first bishop of among the disciples of Jesus, okay? And he was the only bishop. So he had the ultimate authority in among the disciples of Jesus. So if he had the ultimate authority among the disciples of Jesus, they did not question him at all. Why? This is the brother of Jesus. He was one of the apostles. He was there when Jesus was preaching. So whatever this man says is what it is. Okay. And so James was the ultimate authority on the teachings of Jesus, on who Jesus is. This is why this book is so important for us to figure out who Jesus is. Okay. And so James is the first and only bishop among the disciples of uh, of Yeshua or of Jesus. He had the ultimate authority, not only in the church but amongst the other groups of disciples of Jesus. When we look at James, he calls himself the servant of God, and he refers to Jesus as Lord, which means master or teacher. Okay. So he refers to Jesus as Lord. He doesn't refer to him as God. He doesn't refer to him as the Son of God. He refers to him as the master or the teacher. Okay. And the whole book of James, the whole book of James, the entire book of James, he only puts Jesus's name 2 times in the entire letter, 5 chapters, and Jesus's name is only mentioned 2 times. This should be significant, okay? Because God's name, God, is in the book of James a lot more than 2 times. So this is an indication that James did not worship Jesus. Okay? Big indication. And then there's no reference to the resurrection or to the virgin birth. Those doctrines are not there. We don't see anything about an atonement. We don't see anything about the blood of Jesus and the body of Jesus. Those things are not in there, which tells us if James is not teaching these doctrines, then these doctrines have nothing to do with Jesus. This is the most important. If you don't remember anything in this whole study, this is the most important book of the New Testament. When we look at the book of James, it's not about who Jesus is. It's about the believer, how he should act, and how he should treat the poor. This is interesting. This is really interesting because Jesus spoke about the poor a lot. So now James comes, he's speaking about the poor, just like Jesus was. Okay? We're going to talk about the poor and who the poor are in another video. But Jesus is, or James is reiterating the teaching of Jesus, but he is not calling Jesus God. He's calling him teacher. He's not even calling him a prophet. And this is important because the entire New Testament, there is no mention of Jesus being a prophet. That might offend some people, but that's the way it is. So James is not worshiping Jesus, but Jesus is his teacher. So the next event among the disciples of Jesus is the Jerusalem Council. Now, the context of this council, this entire this selection is from Acts chapter 15. Remember that the book of Acts is written by Luke. We will be talking about the book of Acts and Luke later on in another video. But the Jerusalem Council was a very important council. The context, though, is only given by Luke in the book of Acts, chapter 15. Luke tells us that there were men who were coming from Jerusalem teaching that there is no salvation without circumcision. Okay? Here is something that we have to understand about the New Testament. Jesus himself never talks about salvation. You might remember Matthew chapter 24, he who endures unto the end shall be saved. But shall be saved from what? So shall be saved from the things that he's prophesying about. Okay, so Jesus doesn't talk about being saved or salvation. He talks about righteous living, living according to the way that God wants us to live, and how to treat the poor and those who are in need. But these men are coming from Jerusalem teaching that there is no salvation without circumcision. We get this from Acts chapter 15 and verse 2. And so Luke says that there were believers from the sect of the Pharisees who were making this suggestion. This is another thing. The fact that these the people making this suggestion are considered Pharisees is a very important point, that they may not have been a part of the group that were considered the disciples of Yeshua or the disciples of Jesus. Okay. And so they were outside. They were probably the Pharisees evangelized. The Essenes didn't really evangelize. The Sadducees, they probably evangelized too. And then you had the rest of the groups that were probably evangelizing. And so the believers from the sect of the Pharisees were making this suggestion. The apostles were not Pharisees. They were not. If they learned from Jesus, they were not Pharisees. Jesus combated the Pharisees often, very often, and the Sadducees and the scribes. All of these, he went back and forth with them often, but he never went back and forth with the Essenes. Keep that in mind. The apostles did not teach that circumcision was necessary for salvation. Jesus never talks about circumcision. Jesus never talks about circumcision. Never. So this should be important. The Pharisees have never demanded circumcision for salvation. Okay, for covenant, yes, but for salvation, no. The author of the book of Acts, who is Luke, does not know the difference between Pharisees and zealots. The zealots are the ones who demand circumcision for salvation. Okay, the zealots are the ones who they would follow Gentiles if they heard them speaking about the Torah or the scriptures, and they would literally force them to be um, circumcised. Okay, so if there is a dispute about circumcision and salvation, it had to have come from the zealots. Luke is a Gentile who converted to Judaism and does not know about Hebraic context. He doesn't know about the Jews. Remember, this debate in Acts chapter 15 in the first few verses is outside of Jerusalem. They later take this dispute to Jerusalem to ask the apostles. Okay, and we all know how that went. A lot of people have opinions on it, but basically, the entire council was built around the question on what are the prerequisites for Gentiles to enter into the community. Not Gentiles, but people, period. Remember, the people who were debating this question were outside of Jerusalem. The apostles are in Jerusalem. They know what to do, but the people outside of Jerusalem don't know what to do. So they're going to Jerusalem to ask. In this chapter, when we see James speaking, he is not referring to Jesus in this whole chapter. He does not refer to Jesus, nor do we see him worshiping Jesus. And that's pretty important, because most of the things that we see from the beginning, or from the older events of history, when it comes to the disciples of Jesus, there is no deity of Jesus. Okay, and then the next event, or the next oldest book, is the book of Matthew. So when people date the book of Matthew, they like to say that it's after 70 AD, or after the year 70, when the temple was destroyed. But the problem with that is that the Apostle Thomas went to India in the year 52, and according to tradition, he was carrying the Gospel of Matthew. So if the Apostle Thomas is going to India in the year 52, this means that the book of Matthew was already written. So it may have been written around the time of the Jerusalem Council. Um, and it seems that people went out, um, and from there, and started other churches in other communities. So when it comes to the book of Matthew, Christianity will say, well, the book of Matthew was written in Greek. But the church fathers tell us that the book of Matthew was written by Matthew in the language of the Hebrews, in the language of the Jews' own language. Okay, in the Jews' own language, so that they could understand. So the gospel, there is no proof that Matthew wrote a Greek gospel, but the gospel was translated from Hebrew to Greek at a later time. Now, there are differences between the Hebrew Matthew and the Greek Matthew. The Greek Matthew has 3 columns, or 3 chapters more. So the first 2 chapters were added and the last chapter was added. The Hebrew gospel did not have these 3 chapters. So that means that the virgin birth and the resurrection were not included in the gospel of in the Hebrew gospel of Matthew. We're going to talk about why the selection of the Lord's Supper in Matthew chapter 26 was not included also. And then the predictions of betrayal were also not there. The Hebrew Gospel of Matthew was translated into Greek, and these things were added to it But in the book of Matthew, Jesus is referred to as the rabbi throughout the book, or the teacher. He also refers to himself as the Son of Man. So the Son of Man, we see this also in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is um, Ezekiel is referred to by the deity that's speaking with him, calls him Son of Man. But in the book of Matthew, Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. And he usually does this when he is prophesying. And so the Son of Man automatically has something to do with prophecy. So from this,